So you're telling me that this thing that people used to kind of abuse you with, lazy, maybe some of it was from yourself and some of it was from other people, describes something that, like, you're unable to tyrannize yourself when something doesn't align with your gift. In part one, Yuki admitted that he was lost. Being lost doesn't mean there's nothing there. It means it hasn't been named yet. In part two, he sees what about him is still true, even when he's lost. You've tapped into some significant honesty. And we need a bit of guidance. We gotta know what to do about the problem of figuring out what's real. Doesn't mean that it has to come from me or any particular place, but it's got to come from somewhere.
Right.
Very well. So that framework that I introduced to you, I'm just going to go over briefly. It involves a gift, a mission, a name, an exile, and a return. You use this word wandering to describe not really sure what's going to stick forever. Exile is a very useful word for that. If you think about it like that, it means that you're just not in your home, basically. It means you're it's like you're banished for a while. Even if you don't know exactly where your home is, it's not wherever you are, and that's apparent. It's consistently part of a man's development. Virtually every man, actually. It's a very, 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 very strong pattern.
Not to sidetrack, I don't want to sidetrack, but I definitely think there was, when I told my parents about kind of this foray, I guess, or this departure from finance, it definitely maybe felt a little like an exile, not an exile from their love, but kind of a departure from kind of what was expected.
Very well. Very good. All right. Exile. Well, you can't become a man without it. You'll just remain a boy. Every person has a gift.
Sure.
Maybe multiple gifts, which can be confusing. But every person has a unique gift that is connected to the true them. There's a deepest gift within all of us. And that gift is connected to whatever, this mission is supposed to be. And very often, as we approach it, we end up accumulating names. Sometimes they're given by ourselves, and sometimes they're given by other people in the world. And the relationship between these three things is very instructive. Names are incredibly powerful. But let's fill in this blank a little bit. Is there any inkling that you may have if you just think, well, you know what? What is my real gift?
Well, I think so. In terms of I definitely feel like I have multiple gifts. And I think in terms of problem solving, the fact is I'm sure there's a lot better problem solvers out there. Let me give one, and then I think a deeper one. So the first one would be being able to, and one of the reasons why I enjoy problem solving is being able to find connections where maybe other people don't see any connections, or see things that maybe other people don't see. But I think, and this is something that my drama instructor told me, is that I was one of how should I phrase this? He's told me that I was one of the most compassionate students he's ever worked with. So in terms of like the deepest one, maybe it's the ability to have compassion on others, on on others, I guess.
What does that mean?
For me, it's more than just putting yourself in the other person's shoes. It's being able to kind of sit with them and sit kind of as them in terms of like, you know, if someone's bummed out about a test, like for me personally, if I was in their shoes, I know myself, I would just say, well, there's next time, you know, but compassion would be, no, like you are them, you know, like you care about your grades, and these grades have some sort of maybe potential, you know, measure of who you are as a person or how others see you, and then being able to, you know, through that lens, you know, get a bad grade and kind of, and then that allows me to have compassion for that individual and be like, man, that really, really sucks. And I don't know if that answers your question about what compassion is for me.
What you're offering is saying, actually, you're willing to be present in that moment.
Sure.
without instantly reaching for closure. You're willing to just kind of sit with something that's not quite right for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a compulsion like to fix things. I think, you know, I definitely fall into that trap, but I'm also very well aware of sometimes you just need to be in the moment.
Now, go back to what you were telling me about problem solving. Are there any kind of commonalities, or does anything rhyme between these two scenarios now that you've presented it in this way?
In the compassion and the see?
Not compassion in general, what you specifically mean, and the way that you approach problem solving.
I think both have sort of for me at least, I think whether it's solving the problem or being there for someone, you're able to help. I don't know. I'm trying to tie in the idea of, in terms of methodology, they're different, but I think there is.
Are they? Let's make this a little easier.
Yeah.
Let's just focus on problem solving.
Sure.
I want you to describe problem solving to me.
With problem solving, you, I guess, first have to identify an issue, right? And then you try to break it up into smaller bits, and then kind of use what you know, I guess, to find kind of solutions, and usually those solutions kind of have a relation to one another, and kind of you kind of enjoy, well, at least one of the parts I enjoy about problem solving is that eureka moment where it's like you had all the pieces, right? You for example, if you're doing a math problem, like, you know, you have all of the fundamental skills, but there's a point in which you realize, oh, this can go with this, and this is how I apply that. And it's kind of that eureka moment. So kind of making those connections that maybe you yourself didn't see before.
Now, if you were to tell me why some people aren't very good at problem solving, what would you say? Why can some people not do that or struggle?
I don't know. I think I always think people are, usually, like I assume people have the capacity to be good problem solvers. I usually
Sure.
point it to a lack of either the fundamentals, like, with a math problem, if you don't know how algebra works, then you're not going to be able to solve like an algebra problem. So there's the fundamentals, but there's also maybe three things. The other one would be kind of not knowing how to break up problems into smaller, manageable pieces. Mm-hmm. And then the third is maybe there's just not an enjoyment from having to exert your brain and energy. The cost is greater than the reward in that sense.
Look, so let me tell you a couple things that I see in this process that jump out to me.
Sure.
In order for this to work, you have to be honest. You have to acknowledge when things are not solved.
Mm-hmm.
That takes bravery. You have to be brave with the brokenness of the world.
Sure.
Or yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Or someone else. Then you have to be willing to sit with it.
Mm-hmm.
And spend time in something that is not solved.
Mm-hmm. And be comfortable with it.
Yeah. And know that maybe a payout will happen.
Mm-hmm.
Even when you don't know how. But you just are there. You're paying your little ticket of faith or whatever it is that makes you stick in that moment and not just run out.
Mm-hmm.
Not instantly say, oh, this is the way out here. Not take some shortcut, but to find the real way, the best way that you can. It requires patience. It requires incredible patience and foresight and compassion, you could say, with the brokenness. Now, do you see any commonalities between these two quote-unquote gifts?
Right. I think there is an aspect of, like you said, patience, but maybe also the fact is that it's uncomfortable, but the ability to sit in something uncomfortable, I don't know what you call that, but because even for me, even as much as I like solving problems, like you do have to sit in the uncomfortableness of it, and that might not ever go away. And I think that's also true with sitting with people and when they're, hurting or when, they have their own problems, right? Like you have to be able to sit with them in that uncomfortable moment. I think also you mentioned this hope, right? I think, at least for me, what makes it bearable, right, is kind of hope. And for problem solving, it's hope that there is a solution, or that maybe even more than there is a solution, the hope and faith that you can come to the solution, right, yourself. And then with compassion, you have to have kind of hope and trust or faith that that I guess not necessarily sometimes things don't work out for the people, but at least that what you're doing and you being there actually is helpful. Otherwise, I wouldn't be there. If I didn't think I was going to be helpful for that person, I think it's better to, if you're not going to help, then don't put yourself there.
Well, you've just shared an incredible gift You have now we have a single articulation of a single gift.
Hope?
It's this capacity, it's this whole process, the whole end-to-end process of being able to sit with and move through things that are a little broken or not ideal.
Sure.
Whether it's problems or people, it's the capacity to imagine solutions. It's the capacity. It's this whole process of dealing with these kinds of issues. You have competence end to end in every part of that, at least at some level. And your willingness to just do that is not common. This is the gift. You are willing to go and to stay in places that most people don't and won't. Specifically in this kind of situation, at an unusual level. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And, thank you for articulating it. I don't know if I could have gotten to that.
Well, let's poke on this a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
How about would you like to share some names that you've accumulated throughout your life?
Yeah.
Both good ones and the ones that kind of hurt.
Yeah. I mentioned compassion. That was one of the teachers. I've gotten friendly. I think in middle school they gave out fake awards for things, and I got friendly.
You were awarded the Friendly Award.
There you go. Yeah.
Why does that make you laugh?
Why does it make me laugh? I think for one, I am actually. It is nice that they gave that they. I do carry weight on being friendly. I think being friendly and kind are great characteristics to be said of someone. Like, they're great compliments. And so, one, I appreciate the compliment, but I also do think wonder how much of that is it sounds like as if they were like just grabbing at air trying to figure out different awards to give out, but at the same time I do think it was genuine. But yeah. It just sounds very disgenuine. And that's why I laugh at it. I think other ones would be, I've gotten smart, I've gotten talented. I think some of the ones that, negative ones could be like lazy. I mean, I struggle very much with procrastination, and maybe, what else? What are some other negative ones? I think I had one teacher in English, and they caught themselves, well, anyway, they said strange. But anyway, so strange, but I think, at the same time, maybe silly or stupid. And I've definitely done silly and stupid things. What else? I mentioned friendly. I think kind, charitable. Yeah.
The positive ones, do you see any relationship with what we just talked about as your gift and these names? At least the positive ones?
Yeah, I think yeah, being able to things like kind and friendly and charitable require being able to be there for others and put yourself in these uncomfortable situations. Yeah, I mentioned smart and did I say intelligent? But I think those also happen a lot of the times because they're like, oh my goodness, yeah, I didn't think about that. You know, that's so smart. So that also requires being able to kind of put yourself in a position that other people don't go to. Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, all the positive ones, like they're pretty dang self-evident that they're describing some part of this little trajectory that we already mentioned in your gift.
Sure.
So now let's go to these less pleasant ones. Let's
Yeah.
start with lazy.
Yeah.
Is that the kind of? Would you have ever called yourself that when you were playing soccer?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think there were times when I wasn't running, as fast as maybe I could have, and or yeah, you do a bunch of exercises, and there's a difference between ending a training night completely, exhausted versus like, I'm sore, but I definitely didn't give it my all.
But we know why.
Sure.
Why? Why was that you didn't give it your all?
I had mentioned kind of the culture but yeah, I mean, I wasn't as excited about, but I don't know. I think one of the reasons why I wasn't as excited about it was maybe I didn't see how it related to putting yourself in uncomfortable. I mean, it's physically uncomfortable, but it wasn't mentally or emotionally uncomfortable, if that makes sense.
Oh, are you trying to tell me that it didn't quite fit your gift?
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, physical exercise and sports definitely pushes people, and there are a lot of uncomfortable moments, but I think for me it's more intellectually, emotionally, like non-physically.
Okay. So be it. Okay. So you're telling me that this thing that people use to kind of abuse you with, lazy, maybe some of it was from yourself and some of it was from other people, describes something that you're unable to tyrannize yourself when something doesn't align with your gift.
Sorry, what do you mean by unable to tyrannize?
You can't tyrannize or to force yourself to...
to do?
Yeah, it turns out that you're not, as much as you may like to be a little slave driver to yourself, your body has needs.
Right.
And your emotions have needs. And there's only so many things in the world that fulfill those needs.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out that not everything you do does.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least not well.
Yeah. Yeah, so sports, I think, didn't really fit that.
What's another negative one that you mentioned?
What was the other one? I said lazy. I probably said, I know I said stupid.
Oh, stupid.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
And that's not a good, yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Stupid.
Yeah.
Where might that come up?
I think in all of the situations where that was mentioned is because it was, in something that wasn't what it was related to things that I had a weakness in. So, for example, English and writing. I had mentioned how the teacher called me strange. My English teacher called me strange. I think it was a catch not to say stupid because she said strange. But yeah, I mean, the fact is, I think for me, writing and that process just uses a different part of kind of my brain and my strengths and was something that I was definitely weak in or improficient in. And I think kind of tying it back to what you said about kind of the connection you made earlier with sports, and I do think it probably is because maybe English doesn't align with kind of the gifts that I have.
Wow, look at that. It's kind of like we're getting a theme out of here.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
So we can continue this exercise. I think you're beginning to get the point.
Right.
The point is that these names that we accumulate tend to reveal our gift.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to describe the positive and the negative aspects of that gift. Because it turns out that, as you are aware, not everything is a problem to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Which, that's great. It just means that not everything's for you.
Mm-hmm.
It means maybe you struggle with some other things, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Because maybe you can solve these problems really well.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's good enough.
Yeah.
Because if you're this, friendly guy that maintains friendships, meaningful friendships, well, then maybe there's other people out there that can, be a little bit better at some of this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, the outline of your gift can be pretty clearly shown by by the collection of names that you accumulate. This is an exercise I leave with you to keep going with. I would encourage you to reach much deeper to the most painful names you've ever accumulated and see what they tell you. See if they have any kind of shape around your particular gift. You can do this both for names that are negative and names that are very special and positive. The way that we know that we're on the right track with the gift is whenever we have a very, very strong overlap between the names and the gift. When we say, this clearly is describing like the same thing from these different perspectives, and it's through that process that eventually we learn, maybe this gift has a context and an environment where it could be useful. That is the mission.
Mm.
It is deploying that gift where it makes sense to use it, where it naturally is useful and beneficial rather than an impediment. When we figure out how to do that in multiple ways, then we're benefiting by compounding that gift. Because every time you go through one of these iterations, you get a little bit better,
Mm-hmm.
which is great. And if this is something that's always true about you, then every time you can get a little bit better at it
Right.
is a huge win.
Yeah.
It's a huge win.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to leave you with this great answer about what it is that you should be doing, but I give you this kind of ideas about some of the things that you probably should do not as much of, and other things that you can start to look in a little bit more
Sure.
into. And I'd like to see what happens whenever you
Yeah.
continue thinking about these things.
For sure.
But yeah, Yuki, thanks for showing up. Thanks for being radically honest. And this has
Yeah.
been a blast.
Thank you. And I honestly do appreciate you calling me out for when I'm not, because I think that's one of the best benefits of having kind of someone to talk to and someone that, you can maybe springboard off of. And so it's been super helpful.
Mm-hmm. Till next time.
Yeah.
In the interview, I said problem solving and compassion are the same gift. I want to tweak that. Compassion is the root. It's the kind, open patience to stay with what's unresolved in a person, and that is the same capacity that lets him sit with an unresolved problem. But the problem solving is a branch, the branch. It's the payoff that he offers after. They're not identical, but for him, they depend on and feed each other. Hope that helps. Yuki's gift was there the whole time, in card tricks, theater, and the way he sits with people. Every piece he could already list himself. He still needed someone to name it. Now he can bring them all together. To get the framework that helped him do that, follow the link in the description below.